The year 2020 has had humanity be slow to a halt at times as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as our world stops, not everyone on this planet had that option.
As the COVID-19 pandemic deepens, the threat to the Brazilian Amazon is growing virtually unchecked.
Mauritius' Blue Bay may be turning black, and this is the reason. A carrier with 4,000 tons of fuel ran aground in the reefs in this protected area and has been leaking for days.
Here are more details on the findings. An estimated 2.46 billion reptiles were killed, 180 million birds, 143 million mammals, 51 million frogs. It's hard to comprehend, isn't it?
Environmental degradation is at an all-time high as a result of human impact. As the natural oxygen makers, a reduction in the number of trees will lead to less oxygen being produced, which of course could lead to effects on human health. But if it's just the trees we need, then why do we care about Earth's biodiversity? Each ecosystem is balanced with producers, decomposers, and consumers. If the balance gets altered, it can have devastating effects on the habitat. This is where animal conservation efforts are needed. Whilst there are instances of natural extinction, human overpopulation and overfarming is leading to the quick extinction of many different species worldwide. Nature conservation groups look to help the most affected communities and help to slow their decline. Zoos worldwide are increasing their efforts in animal conservation. After all, where else can you go and within an hour's drive be able to see species you could only otherwise see after an 18-hour flight? Zoos are places where we get to learn about what else lives around us on Earth. Speaking at the Toledo Zoo, Kent Becker, Senior Vice President and Chief Mission Officer at the zoo, discussed their efforts to help animals locally and worldwide.
So Toledo Zoo for the last few years has put a lot of energy into some of the local conservation efforts, but we still do maintain some of the international. But the local conservation efforts were undertaken because they work really well for the mission side of the zoo and inspiring people to care about wildlife, because we're talking about some of the same conservation issues that are facing some of these exotic species, but they're going on in your backyard, and when it has a backyard species associated with it, I think people get a little bit of a better understanding. So in the last few years we've done a lot with sturgeon, and what's really interesting from a mission perspective and a conservation education perspective is some of these that I'm going to mention we've integrated into the zoo's exhibitry now, which is really fun. So we have, sturgeon. The goal, conservation goal, is to get sturgeon in the Maumee River to establish a population. But if we can do that and have a sturgeon touch tank like we have here at the zoo, hopefully people are not only realizing we're doing the conservation side, but we're also doing what we really need to be doing as an institution, which is using these animals in a captive situation to actually affect hopefully even more of a change.
But it's not just locally that the zoo is having an impact. One of the Toledo Zoo's big international projects is to help with Tasmanian devils located on the island of Tasmania off the coast of Australia. As shown on the map, research has been ongoing since 1997 and spreading across the land, with a future expedition planned for the southwest corner of the island. The species is currently undergoing rapid decline due to the emergence of devil facial tumour disease, a cancer which can cause death within 6 months due to organ failure. The Tasmanian devil population is estimated to have lost 90% of wild devils as a result of this infectious disease. The Toledo Zoo has partnered with the Save the Tasmanian Devil program in order to help find a way to stop the spread of this disease, as well as keeping a safe breeding and reintroduction program.
We have been one of the pioneers as far as zoos, as far as managing doves in captivity, and that put us in a great situation to use some of that knowledge base to actually work in the Solomon Islands with imperiled doves there, and actually in using some of our husbandry knowledge kind of more from a classic zoo perspective to assist with conservation efforts.
Despite an expectation that a zoo would focus on only its animals, at the Toledo Zoo they look not only at their fauna, but their flora as well.
So one of the spots we're expanding is probably our Wild Toledo initiative. We're always converting more portions of the property to native plantings, which gives us a unique opportunity to interpret some of the habitats, but it also allows us here on property to integrate some of that conservation messaging right here. And that means we have less grass to mow, less non-native plants to tend. And we're also launching more of the plant sales, which means that we are now in a position where we can help local residents do it themselves. So that's definitely been growing a lot, and we hope to see a lot of more growth in that Wild Toledo side of our conservation efforts here at the Toledo Zoo. And from a conservation education perspective, our education staff has now integrated a lot of that into programs like Project Prairie, where the conservation department is making prairies on school properties, and then our education staff is helping teach teachers to use that in their curriculum and get kids out in this now natural habitat that was historically just a lawn before. So it's an area that I think we'll see a lot of growth, and it's an area where I think we're getting a lot of benefit from educating the public.
But what benefits are there for native plants at the zoo?
Planting native plants is incredibly beneficial for several reasons. One, they have a much deeper root bed than most of the plants that we choose to plant, which means that they manage rainwater much, much better. So rather than that rain event, especially in an urban environment, going directly into our storm and directly into Lake Erie and bringing pollutants and nutrients in with it, it's handled much better there. But also, it's providing habitat for a lot of species. And we think about the pollinators, but even the species that feed on these plants are incredibly beneficial for the bird species that feed on those. So it's the very basic of the food chain, and to be able to do that in your backyard, I mean, it's pretty amazing when residents plant milkweed of any of the 6 species of milkweed that we have here in this region. It's almost immediate that monarch butterflies are there using that as a food resource, rearing young on that, and that's a very simplistic example of the kind of dividends that this very simple transformation is doing for the ecosystem and restoring some very basic ecosystem function that we often don't think about in these urban environments, but are very beneficial.
But are these projects having any success?
We're starting to see a point where a lot of these, even our newer local programs, are really starting to see some positive results. We've released sturgeon 2 years in a row. This would have been our 3rd year if it had not been for the pandemic. And we've already seen some of those sturgeon recovered in Lake Erie. Some of our partners that are doing the acoustic tag work with those sturgeon know that they're swimming around the western basin of Lake Erie, and they're growing and appear to be doing really well.
One of the other successful conservation projects of the Toledo Zoo in recent years has been its hellbender work. The eastern hellbender is a state endangered species, and they need siltration-free streams for survival. Currently, the Toledo Zoo is collecting eggs and rearing them at the zoo, so when returned to the wild, their chances of survival are increased. Slowly, but surely, hellbender populations are increasing throughout Ohio streams.
We've studied landing turtles in western Lucas County going on 15 years now, and we're finally in a position where in 2021 we're going to be releasing some Toledo Zoo head-started young landing turtles to actually essentially salvage a population that would have been lost otherwise. So, we definitely see throughout all these projects positive gains and benefits to the conservation of this species.
But just because your favourite animal doesn't have a program focused on it, doesn't mean they aren't being helped. There are endangered polar bears at the Toledo Zoo, but the zoo chooses to highlight some other lesser known species so that they get the help they need as well.
And I initially undervalued this passive education that people get when they come to the zoo, and that was short-sighted me as an earlier zoo professional to not value that, because what Corey was alluding to, I mean, there is incredible value in people seeing these elephants in captivity, and there are things that you can read on the graphics here, but even if you don't make it that far, I really do think people get a much greater appreciation for wild animals from seeing them here, because we see a lot of our visitors that simply don't get to see that.
But everyone can help our planet, and there are many simple ways that you can practice. Use a refillable water bottle instead of plastic. Unplug and power down appliances that you aren't using. Use lemon juice or baking soda instead of chemical cleaners. Reduce waste by utilizing reusable shopping bags, recycling plastics, and donate no longer wanted items. These simple methods can help to reduce your carbon footprint and create a healthier habitat for all. There are also apps made to help decide which items are best to purchase. For example, orangutans are threatened with extinction in the next 10 years if their environments continue to be destroyed for palm oil. There is the Palm Smart app, which tells you whether a product contains palm oil, and if so, what the manufacturer's policy is for producing the products. These are all little things everyone can do to help out. But what are other ways to get involved with conservation?
I think another thing that residents can do is support organizations in your area that do conservation efforts or support conservation. So I think a lot of people often think about park districts or organizations that are maintaining land, but I think they need to realize that visitation to entities like your local zoo, specifically in this case Toledo Zoo, is helping with conservation of animals, and continuing to support organizations like Toledo Zoo is incredibly beneficial in and of itself as a conservation effort.
Although we have started to right some of our wrongs, we still have much more work to do. Conservation groups need support in order to complete the missions that they have set out to do, and whether it's a small group or an entire zoo, they need help. By doing small actions every day, we can help better our planet and every species that lives on it.